On the 23rd of January 2009, someone walked into Kdv, Berlin's biggest department store with 9 floors, the kind of place that sells 60,000 euro watches next to the perfume counter, and left with $4.1 million in jewelry, gone in 15 minutes. Police lifted DNA from a pair of gloves left at the scene and got a match almost immediately. 2 matches, actually. Identical twins named Hassan and Abbas O, already known to police, already convicted of running the exact same style of heist years earlier. But the case fell apart. Not because the DNA was wrong, it was a match, both times to both brothers, but because German prosecutors couldn't prove which twin's hand was actually in that display case. Under German law, you can't convict someone roughly. You have to convict a specific person for a specific act. The forensic evidence that's supposed to end every argument had just created one nobody could win. Both brothers walked free. The arrest warrants were technically suspended, not dropped, meaning police can still reopen the case for another decade if new evidence turns up. But for now, through a family member, the twins told a Berlin newspaper they were grateful to the German legal system. Grateful for the system failing to convict them. And I would be too if me and my twin sister got away with $4.1 million or whatever it was. And it's kind of a funny place to end a story about a jewelry heist. It's a much heavier place to end up when the case isn't about diamonds at all. This isn't just a Berlin problem. Facial recognition has the same blind spot. Apple built FaceID with a stated 1 in a million false match rate for random faces, then quietly admitted in its own support documentation that it does not recommend the feature for identical twins because it genuinely cannot always tell them apart. A $20 sensor in a phone and a full-state forensics lab, both stuck on the same problem. I got to watch that admission prove itself in my own kitchen. I got a new iPhone last year and set up Face ID for myself, obviously, and no one else had set it up in the phone. But my twin sister came to town to visit. She picked up my phone just to look at it because it was new and shiny, and it unlocked immediately. First try with no hesitation. And there was no face not recognized, warning or anything. She never even touched it before, but we both just stood there laughing because Apple's own engineers had basically told us this could happen, and it was still somehow funnier at watching it happen live. Then there's the version of this that isn't a crime at all, just a legal mess with nowhere to file it. In the UK, a woman had a daughter with one of 2 identical twin brothers. She knew which one. But standard paternity testing came back with the same result for both men, because their DNA is close enough to be functionally identical under current testing standards. The child, as of right now, has no legally determined father. Not because anyone is lying, because the test that's supposed to settle it can't. So far, this has all been kind of charming, and it's kind of funny when twins can come up with this, but a heist nobody could pin down, a phone that can't keep a secret, and a paternity case with no good answer. Obviously, that could cause a lot of problems, but in that other case, not so much. Cute problems. But there's a darker version of this same gap, and it played out in Conyers, Georgia in January of 2010, and I hope I'm saying that right. 16-year-old twin sisters Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead came home and told police they'd found their mother beaten and stabbed to death in the bathtub. For months that was their story, and investigators treated the girls as traumatized witnesses. Then a gas station surveillance camera turned up footage placing the twins 2 hours later than they'd claimed, at a location their story never even mentioned. Investigators brought them in separately, and their accounts of that morning stopped lining up with each other. Physical evidence followed, blood at the scene, and the bite marks left on their mother's body during what the medical examiner described as a close-range, frenzied attack. The why turned out to be less dramatic than the crime itself. The twins had spent years bounced between their mother's house and their grandmother's, and just weeks before the murder, a court sent them back to live with their mother under a strict 2-week trial arrangement they hadn't wanted. Investigators later found a letter one twin had written to her boyfriend saying she hated living there and had told her mother more than once that she wished she were dead. On the morning of the killing, the fight started small, an argument about being late for school that escalated fast, ending in that bathroom. Here's where it generally gets strange from a forensic standpoint. The blood at the scene belonged to the mother, and to both daughters. Not one daughter, both, because they're identical twins. Standard DNA profiling couldn't cleanly separate this blood is sister A from this blood is sister B, the way it would with any two unrelated people. Investigators had to fall back on dental impressions instead, since bite mark patterns, like fingerprints, actually do vary between identical twins even when their DNA doesn't. That's what eventually tied a specific bite to Tasmiyah. The murder weapon evidence was airtight. The tool meant to say exactly whose hand did exactly what physical act had to come from teeth, not genes. The same gap that led the Cadouet twins' walk, just barely papered over this by a set of dental molds. In the end, prosecutors never fully separated the two either. Both twins pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. Both got the same sentence, 30 years, with the possibility of parole. Not because the justice system decided they were equally guilty in some abstract moral sense, but because the case, like the heist, ran straight into that same wall. The evidence could place both of them at the center of it, and it only barely started to divide the specifics between them. And I just have to say, as a twin myself, you're lumped into being the quote same person all the time, and I can't imagine that happening for a murder. So going to jail for your sister's crimes is ridiculous. I think in this case they did it together, but still, that would be crazy. That's the thing about a loophole. It doesn't know the difference between a heist and a tragedy. It's not on anyone's side. It's just a gap in what the DNA can actually prove. Sitting there indifferent, whether what falls through it is funny or not. Standard DNA testing looks at maybe 20 genetic markers. Identical twins share basically all of them because they came from one fertilized egg that split into two. The only way around it, and it exists, it's just expensive and slow, is deep whole genome sequencing, hunting for those tiny mutations that happen after the split, cell by cell as each twin's body builds itself separately. Most labs and most departments, most phones aren't running that test. They're running the one that treats identical twins as one person with two bodies, which legally and forensically is exactly what they still are. And just to prove this isn't only a problem for phones and prosecutors, in January of 2023, a mother in Cordoba, Argentina, I hope is also how you say that, named Sofia Rodriguez, had two sons, Lorenzo and Valentin, and kept them straight with identifying bracelets. Then she took the bracelets off to bathe them, and that was it. Game over, she could not tell her own newborns apart. And neither could her husband. She ended up posting about it online and asking authorities for help, and it actually worked its way to forensic identification experts. For a problem that had nothing to do with a crime, just two brand new humans who looked exactly alike. They eventually sorted out with fingerprints, which, unlike DNA, are different even in identical twins. So if you ever needed proof that this loophole doesn't discriminate between a jewel heist and a Tuesday afternoon at home, there it is.